So it looks like we have Annalisa, Claudio. I noticed Jeff Noodleman sent me an email about a half an hour ago saying he had a 9:30 and he will probably join us late. Did we hear from PJ at all? I don't see him on the call.
I don't believe so. Let me double check my email.
But for now, we'll go ahead and get started. Let me pull up my agenda here. So welcome, folks. Today is Thursday, April 27th, 2023. This is the Penn One monthly board meeting, and this meeting is being video recorded, and we'll go ahead and do a roll call, starting with Claudio Campuzano.
Present.
Thank you, Claudio. Annalisa Kohler.
Present, and just a heads up, I will need to step out from 10:30 to 11, but we'll be hopping back on.
Great, thank you, Annalisa. And I mentioned that Jeff Noodleman will join us later, and we'll wait to see if PJ is joining us. James Allison is present, so we have 3 of 5, and we have a quorum. Apologize, I'm multitasking. Let me let me not do that. I normally don't do that, but I just need to pull up our agenda here quickly.
Well, while I have you captive here, let's see, I just want to give you a heads up that June 21st is our scheduled annual landowner meeting. So I'll be getting started on that. And I'm assuming you'd like to hold that virtually or on Zoom.
Does that sound good to everyone?
Nodding.
Great. Thank you. Well, I'm ready now. And for what it's worth, I was sending out meeting requests and information for the PIR pump station grant. For those of you who haven't heard, last week we were informed by the State of Oregon Office of Emergency Management that we were awarded our grant for the redesign, or the design and some of the real estate and other fact-finding work that needs to happen for us to ultimately place the PIR pump station. So that's good news. There's some additional good news on top of that, that there may be some state funding available for the project as well, and that might give us some, I hate to use the word contingency so early, but gives us a little bit of opportunity should the project become more expensive than we initially forecasted. But anyway, more to come on that. So let's jump right into the agenda. We are on to item B, which is the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget presentation with Lori. Before you kick it off, Lori, I just want to, I looked through the materials this morning as I did last week. I just want to thank you for having these available to us more than a week in advance. Everything I've seen is excellent. So I just want to thank you for getting that to us with plenty of notice.
Thank you. And my favorite thing to say is the budget is wrong the minute you print it on the paper. And in this case, it is, because when we pulled everything together, we did not know whether we were going to get the grant or not. We were very happy to hear that we did get that grant award and excited to start planning for that. So Bill and I actually have some time scheduled, I believe early next week, to take a look at our numbers and just see what we'll need to change. And so you will be seeing some updated numbers. Some of the cash flow and some of the funding requests from the city of Portland will change because we were trying to cover all of our bases when we pulled this together. So with that, I'm going to pull up my screen. It's kind of the plus and minus of being a budget person, is that you get the fun of projecting things, but you also get the fun of having things change frequently. So today we're going to review the proposed budget for Penn One for fiscal year 23-24. And we are not asking for any action from the board today. We'll be returning on May 24th so we can review those proposed changes, particularly around the project and what the numbers will look like now that we have additional information. And we'll be asking at that point if there's any additional changes that we need to consider, and so that we can move forward to the adoption of the budget at the format meeting on June 20th. in the time between this meeting and May 24th, if you have questions or if you have adjustments that you want us to consider or to present in May, just contact Jim and I with those via email, and we'll make sure that we get that all pulled together. And if there are questions, we'll pull together a question and answer document and make sure that that gets out to all the board members. So let's just take a look at our agenda. We'll start off with Jim sharing an overview of the budget, and then we'll take a look at some of the key financial issues that should be considered in our budget process. We'll also take a look at the projections for ending operating fund balances for all of the districts. And I'll be reviewing the proposed budget summary, walking you through the revenues and the materials and services proposed. And finally, we'll take a look at the capital projects. I'll point out the areas where there may be some changes and give you an opportunity to ask any questions you may have about the budget. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Jim.
I'm going to be brief. I want to thank all the staff and the finance team in particular for working hard to pull this together. I also think it's really important to acknowledge the City of Portland's ongoing support for Penn One and keeping us solvent. We also get some help, of course, from Metro and the port, so thank them as well. But the city really has stepped in to make sure that we can continue to operate the system in Penn One effectively as possible under the circumstances. So thank you guys. This budget is kind of bare bones, like it typically is for Penn One, but the good news is it does allow us to continue to operate the system, I think, in an effective way. It also collectively provides us with enough resources to continue to try and implement ORS 550 and come up with a way to establish more sustainable operating revenues that don't rely on ongoing support from our municipal partners, and also allow us to streamline the governance of the overall system and advance a bond measure to win the capital we need to maintain federal certification and accreditation. And so I think with that, I just want to thank the board for your time and attention. We appreciate all the help that you give us on top of your day jobs. And let's let Lori get into the details so that you have time to discuss and ask any questions that come up for you today. And once again, just thanks to the team for pulling all this together. I certainly couldn't have done it. And so kudos to both Bill and his team and Colin and everybody who's contributed to the numbers that you need to govern this organization effectively. Lori, thanks. And I'm happy to answer any questions from board members too.
Thank you. All right, so as we review the proposed budget, board members should also be considering some of the key financial issues that Penn One is facing. We're continuing to be faced with challenges related to compression in our assessment revenues. Because of the extent of the compression, the City of Portland has been supporting the district with operational funding, and we're very appreciative of that. Finally, the district continues to face fund balance and cash flow issues and continues to need the support of the city. Admittedly, this proposed budget is less than ideal, but it was our best option given limits to funding available for the district. And if I were to look for a common message for this budget season, it's that these temporary funding mechanisms are really unsustainable for our districts. And we really are hopeful that moving forward with a new revenue mechanism and consolidating the districts will be a good solution for us. So let's take a look now at the projections for operating fund balances for the legacy districts. So as we look towards integration of the districts into the new urban district, our fund balance projections are really a good way to understand timelines and the importance of moving forward with the decisions that are facing the urban board. This chart shows the projected fund balances for each district should real life follow the numbers in the budget, which we all know there's some change to that, but it's usually typically pretty close. The information that we're reviewing here aligns with projections that were provided a few years ago by our former budget director, Casey. For most of the districts, the numbers we need to be aware of are those dollars available for general operations. These are undesignated and operating reserves, which on this chart are in the blue. For MCDD, current operations are supported through drawdowns on operating fund balances. MCDD will not have enough resources in fiscal year 24-25 to continue operating at the same level they're operating at today. Additionally, because a portion of the funds are restricted, we will need to consider interim financing for operating funding, such as paying payroll for the early months in the fiscal year before assessments are collected. In general, we need about $3 million in unrestricted or operating funds to operate until assessment revenues are collected. If the actual financial results of the district align with the budget, we'll have just over $1.1 million in operating funds at the beginning of July 2024. Pen 1, as we discussed, continues to operate at a deficit, which is being covered by the city of Portland. So we have pretty minimal fund balances sitting there that just allow us some cash flow coverage. Pen 2 is also supporting current operations using drawdowns of operating fund balance. Pen 2 will not have enough resources in fiscal year 24-25 to continue operating at the same level they're operating at today. SDIC is able to fund their operations without drawing down on fund balance. However, the challenge for SDIC is on the capital side, where they're estimated to be over $12 million in capital costs for the replacement of the pump station in fiscal year 2027. That project is included in the PMLS projects, but if SDIC were looking at just their independent operations and we weren't able to move forward with the PMLS funding, they would be faced with that funding deficit in 2027. The urban district is budgeted to spend down all fund balance by the end of 2024. So this fund balance information is consistent with what was provided a few years ago by Casey. The transition to the urban district and implementation of new funding mechanisms will allow us to address these funding shortfalls. And we have sent out now to the urban district updated revised forecast for the district and some proposals on revenue funding. So we're really hopeful that things will keep moving forward in that arena. We're providing information on the proposed budget for MCDD for all of the district boards, and you'll notice that we included the proposed MCDD, the full proposed MCDD budget in your packet as well. We want to be transparent with that information because it's important for all of you to be aware of the decisions that are being made by that board with MCDD staff providing services to all of our other districts. The proposed budget for MCDD personnel costs is $7 million. This line item includes wages, benefits such as health insurance, the PERS retirement, employer taxes, and employee support such as training. The budgeted employee count is the same for fiscal year 22-23 with no new positions proposed. Currently, the proposed budget for wages includes a 4% cost of living increase and a 2% merit adjustment. Our board did review this on Tuesday and had some concerns that perhaps it wasn't enough. I've sent them some additional information, so we don't have final numbers on what these increases will look like, but currently we have 4% and 2% in the proposed budget. As you can see from the pie chart, the operations departments included in the green section total 20 FTEs with support services in the blue section totaling 18 FTEs. There's additional details on pay schedules and positions included in the proposed budget document. So if you pull out that MCDD document, you can see what each of our grades pay schedules are and how many employees are on each grade. In your package, you have the full proposed budget document for Pen 1, and this is a summary of that budget. On the resource side of the equation, we're starting with $210,000 of carry forward dollars in beginning fund balance. This is the timing of the local partner support for PMLS, so it's not extra cash. It was planned and included in this just as we had local partners that wanted to pay their full amount up front. And so those dollars are restricted. We'll be reviewing the cash flow for PMLS later in this presentation today. The proposed budget anticipates an assessment rate increase of 5% with a 44.3% tax compression rate, which is really large. We're assuming a 5% loss to discounts, adjustments, and delinquencies, and we'll walk through that whole calculation of assessment revenue on a future slide. Contract revenues include the dollars anticipated to cover operational funding shortages and some capital support from the city of Portland. This is one of those areas where Bill and I need to look at this and make sure that we're still accurate with the funding now that we know that the grant is coming in. I know that there were some things that we might have counted twice that will need to be adjusted. So we'll make sure that you get that information by our May meeting. Oh, and I did want to note too that some of these payments haven't yet been contracted with the city. We're still having discussions about those amounts and making sure that we get them in the right place in the city budget. Other revenue includes interest earnings on funds in the local government investment pool. It's pretty small. It's $1,000. We don't keep a lot of extra cash, obviously, and $2,000 in development review fees. Grant revenue supporting PMLS local match contributions from OBDD is $323,000. When we take a look at that PMLS funding schedule, we'll talk about the possibility that the $23-24 may shift into the $22-23 may shift into $23-24, and we would have 2 years worth then, so it might look a little bit different in the next version of the budget. And grant revenue from the PIR pump station is projected at $681,000. I can't remember if that was completely accurate, but I think it's close. Materials and services of $800,000 include system maintenance costs and operating supplies, non-capital projects, professional services, and administrative expenses. And we'll walk through that in a little more detail in just a second. We have $1.4 million in capital spending, and we'll talk about that in a future slide as well. And debt service reflects principal interest that's due on outstanding borrowing. The proposed ending fund balance is a little under $300,000. About half of this is restricted for spending on capital assets due to the timing of the contributions that are supporting the PMLS project. So it's not extra cash that we are holding that's operational, but it's that PMLS funding that's due in the following year. An operating reserve of $90,000 provides us that cash flow that we need for the district to get through early months of the new fiscal year until we collect on assessments.
Lori, I have a quick question.
Sure.
And if you're going to get in, I think I heard that you would, but on the back up to the contract revenues, I heard you say that
Yes.
there's some fixes that may need to occur to that. And I heard mention of a grant, but it's gone up a lot, right? 949 from 442 budget 661. I mean, what's that huge increase?
There's a couple of things that are impacting that. There's some dollars, there's some capital dollars in here that we put in trying to make sure that we reflected the city's investment that was necessary should we receive the grant. And we did receive information after this was pulled together that we did receive authorization for the grant. So we will be, Bill and I will be taking a look at the budget and making sure to true up those numbers, because there was a little bit of double counting. It was like, well, if we don't get the grant, we may need to spend this other money to kind of limp along until we can figure out what to do with the pump station. So there's a little bit of cleanup. The other piece that's in here, PJ, is that there is I think the majority of the increase is the capital funding, but we did also experience a bit of an increase in the operational support from the city as well. They're recognizing kind of the challenges that we were having with balancing the budget, and the city does make up for the compression that we experienced. So it does make it look quite different than the forecast, and even a little bit higher than what we've seen in the budget in the past, mainly because of the capital contributions.
Thanks for the additional clarity.
Sure. Okay, I am going to jump forward to the proposed revenues so that you can.
James has a question, Lori.
Oh, I'm sorry, James. Do you want me to go back to the other slide? You're muted.
Thank you. Just a comment that I think part of the increase and the city contribution to deal with that increase was we went to fixed billing to recognize that we were really not, that fixed billing was needed for us to have certainty in the budget, as well as making sure that Penn One is paying its share of the administrative costs.
Yeah, and there is a bit of an increase in the fixed fee billing, which then needed to be supported through the City of Portland contribution. That's correct. Thank you. So this chart shows the proposed revenue budget with assessments at $318,000, contract revenues at the $950 that we've been talking about, and grants at $1 million. The grants are those two pieces that we talked about. There's the $681,000 for the PIR pump station, the FEMA funding that came through last week. And there's the $323,000 related to the OBDD grant that supports the PMLS local match funding. So this chart is going to walk us through how we calculate the assessment revenues. Bear with me. I'm an accountant, so I love this stuff. May drive you a little bit crazy at the level of detail. We start up here with our 22-23 assessments. So we had an assessment amount of $570,000 for 22-23. We've applied a 5% rate increase. And that brings us to 23-24 assessments of $598,000. What you will see is there are other things that impact that, so we don't collect 100% of it. So a 1% increase in assessment rate actually gives us less than $2,700 in revenue. So it just kind of gives you a sense of how tight things are and how difficult it is to use rate increases to be able to provide additional revenue funding for this district. The compression is really the major problem here, and that's at 44%. So that takes away $264,000 of that 598. It's almost half of it. So the assessments that get imposed, which is what goes out on the bills to the landowners, is $332,000. Then we take out our discounts and adjustments and collectability, and we're using a 5% rate for that. So typically with both property taxes and assessments, you see about 95% of them get paid in the year that they get billed. And then they'll kind of trickle in after that as properties are sold or as landowners are able to find funding to be able to pay their taxes. We add back prior year payments, which is that piece that I was talking about as folks either sell properties or find funding. So we get about $3,000 a year in back tax payments. So that gets us to our total revenue amount of just under $319,000. So we start with an assessment amount of close to 600. We actually collect a little over 300. So it's a pretty challenging situation for this district. So, unfortunately, the board member that asked for this information is not here yet, which is a bummer, but if he has some questions about this later, I'm happy to answer those questions. So what was requested is, what is the impact of the 5% assessment rate increase on specific properties? And so what this slide is showing you is some sample changes to property assessments after compression. So property assessments can vary from year to year depending on the nature of our expenditures within the district. And so even though we've done a 5% increase in assessment rate, it can impact our properties differently because of the shifting of the costs between the cost drivers of the assessments. So all of these sample properties that we show here end up showing an imposed amount that is a 6% change, except for this bottom one, which is a 5% change. You would also need to take a look at the total tax bill for each individual property to see if that increase in assessment actually flows through to their final tax bill, because it may shift some of the compression from us to our other local partners, City of Portland, when we do those sorts of rate increases. So if our assessment rate increases more than 3%, then all of a sudden our weighted share of the compression shifts. So that is about all I have to say about that. So this slide shows the breakdown of proposed expenditures by type. As you can see, capital outlay makes the largest part of Pen 1 spending because of the dollars both for the PMLS local match and for the first phase of the PIR pump station that's grant funded. Materials and services, projects and planning, contracts and agreements, professional services, and admin expense are all part of materials and services. And that's the other piece of the budget. We'll take a look at capital outlay on an upcoming slide, and debt service includes both interest and principal on outstanding debt. So this slide shows the breakdown of materials and services in the proposed budget. Levy and ground maintenance of $72,000 includes that fixed fee for maintenance paid to MCDD of $64,000. The rest of that is supplies that get directly billed to Pen 1. And the proposed budget reflects an $11,000 increase from the amount budgeted in fiscal year 22-23, with part of that being the agreed upon increase in the fixed fee. Operating supplies of $12,000, that's electricity. And the budget is increasing because of rate increases that we're experiencing. We're experiencing rate increases across the board in all of our districts between 15 and 20% for next year. Projects and planning of $363,000 includes $260,000 reserved for repair of the pump and motor at the PIR pump station and $32,000 for PMLS project support. Professional services of $84,000 includes legal services of $48,000, audit fees of $15,000, and government relations of almost $14,000. Professional services has decreased by $16,000 from the current year budget, mainly due to decreases in legal expense. Contracts and agreements include the scheduled payment to JCA of $62,000, payment of $177,000 to MCDD for administrative services under that fixed fee agreement, and a new payment of $10,000 to the urban district to support communication and outreach. Administrative expenses of $14,000 includes $8,000 for liability insurance, and administrative expenses are about $3,000 higher than the 22-23 budget. So this is our capital list of the projects that are included. That $54,000 at the top is one of those items that I think will go away because we kind of put like both options. If we don't get the replacement, the $908,000 that's covered, a good chunk of that is covered by grant funding. Then we put some dollars in there just to kind of limp along with that pump station until we could figure out what to do next. So since we're getting the grant, Bill and I will take a look at this list and make sure to get it cleaned up for when we come back to take a look at this in May. We should also know or have a better feel in May where we're at with the PMLS local match funding and whether we need to shift the 22-23 dollars into 23-24. We know we're going to have annual payments due to the Corps of Engineers. So if the 22-23 agreements take us a little bit longer because we only have 2 months in the fiscal year. So, and there's a lot of agreements that kind of need to be worked through and signed and put into effect. What will happen is that year one funding for PMLS local match will shift into 23-24, but the 23-24 payment won't go away. The federal fiscal year is different than our fiscal year. They're in October 1 through September 30th. So they'll say, okay, payment one, even if it happens in September, that's still a year one. And oh, guess what? We're in our new fiscal year now. So we need the next round of funding. So you may see this dollar increase, but it's just a shift between the 2 years. And hopefully we'll have better information on that when we come back. So this schedule here shows a summary of the PMLS project costs for the first 3 years of the project. We're currently anticipating year one spending will occur in the current fiscal year, but as I said, it's definitely within the realm of possibility that we'll see these amounts shift to 23-24. And in this case, we'd be funding 2 years worth of payments in 23-24. Oops. So this top section shows the total obligation to the Corps of Engineers for each of the first 3 years of the project. And the federal share is 65%, and the local match is 35%, which is typical for this type of funding. The allocation of the local match is shared equally between the 4 districts, and you can see that in the center section. And each district is covering 80% of the local match with that OBDD grant, and the remainder of the local match is provided by the district. And for our district, it's through funding from other local partners. All right. And the last thing I have here for us is the cash flow needs for Pen 1. And this will change a little bit as well because of that grant coming through. So did our best. So this section shows the anticipated timing of the local match payments for the PMLS project. So it really gives you a sense of the carry forward dollars that we have for funding that we had already received from local partners, when the payments are projected to be made, and then the payment needs for 23-24. So the payment timing is driven by requests from the Army Corps, and the district has 30 days to turn around that payment once the request is received. So we'll need to obtain the grant funding during that time period and make sure that we get the payments transferred. This section shows the operational cash flow needs with the operating deficit funding needed in October and January. And more details on those cash flow needs for the upcoming year are included in your packet. So we did a month by month kind of projection. So hopefully, James, that was the information that you were looking for to be able to know how to handle that in your budget process at the city. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, although this is a nice picture, and see if there's any other questions. I always like it when the room's silent.
No questions. I have two comments, and these are a work in progress. One is for the City of Portland IGA for supporting Pen 1 operations for next fiscal year. Janet Olson and I have been working on trying to execute that over the summer so that we're in a good position for cash flow. I don't see any impediments to that. Secondly, and this one, I need to do more fact finding, but being mindful of cash flow, we intend to try to execute the IGA for the between the city and Pen 1 for the PIR pump station. So the money is right now there's city match, there's the federal funding, but we intend for the city to operate like a bank and hopefully provide some startup funding so that we don't have a big lag in reimbursement.
Okay.
In other words, we're hopefully putting Pen 1 in a position where reimbursement, it's less about reimbursement, and the city, Pen 1 has the funding it needs to provide for internal and external payments. So to pay itself and to pay a consultant, most likely. And the city will be its own bank and rely on FEMA to compensate the city.
So will the FEMA dollars be a pass-through grant, or is the city going to? Well, we can talk about that at the meeting. Yeah. It'll just be, because I know there'll be some timing lag for them to do the drawdowns with FEMA. So
our intention is to basically pay city to pay Pen 1, the city will get reimbursed.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, nice job, and thank you for the advanced caveat that the budget will change, and I appreciate your sense of humor around that.
Thank you.
Okay, are we moving on to item C, the fiscal year 24 through 28 CIP presentation with Bill?
Great. Good morning, all. Bill Owen, Chief Engineer of the district. I don't have slides to offer today, so what I will do instead is walk you through the draft 5-year CIP that was in your packet. It starts on page 29, and I'll share my screen so I can walk through it with you. Let me know when people can see that. Thumbs up. Great. So, yeah, so for those who have been around for a little bit, this document will look very similar to years in the past. It provides an overlook of anticipated capital expenses that staff is anticipating for the first 5 years. It also gives you a glimpse of years 6 through 10 to give you some indication of what is coming up. At the beginning, as typical, there's an executive overview, the 5-year forecast for capital expenses, just over $23 million. That's dominated by large projects such as PMLS and the PIR pump station replacement. But in year 1, we're looking at just under $1.4 million. Introduction section gives a background of the district and an overview of what the document entails. There's a section that talks about the capital improvement program development itself, and it goes through a series of steps that staff use to identify projects. I've tried hard in my tenure here at the district to shift to a point where only projects that have been vetted through some sort of engineering planning have get onto the CIP. And we're pretty close to that now, so I'm happy about that. So there, anything we put in front of you has been vetted to some with some detail. And what's been particularly helpful this year is y'all have finished the drainage and water quality master plan. So we have some additional projects that we've included this year that have not been in the past. So that's step 1. Step 2 is going through a process to rank or prioritize projects through a series of criteria: flood risk, emergency preparedness, operational efficiency and safety, and asset integrity and dependability. Each of those are scored based on some guidance that it's not shown here, but is shown to staff of how to score each of those categories. And weights are then applied accordingly. This board has examined those weights in the past, and I've not changed them for this year. Once that initial round of scoring occurs, then we go through an exercise to identify any additional benefits that the project might have, either to the community, to the environment, workplace, whether it's just the watershed health environment, but also workplace environments. And then while these criteria don't have a lot of details associated with them, it's just more of a gut instinct on whether or not that particular project benefits that particular topic. And it's more of a yes/no type of exercise. And once that occurs, the last step is to adjust the initial ranking based on step 2 with those additional value-added criteria. And then some projects will move up, down a little bit, depending on the number of categories of benefits. I will note here that any project that deals with regulatory compliance, we're out of compliance for some reason for a particular area, or contains some sort of partner financial support, just gets elevated to the top of the list. Last year, I introduced a section about costs for the project. And I retained that this year. As several of you know, project costs can vary over time, particularly depending on the maturity. And so when you first develop a project and you've just gone through a planning process, the costs are pretty rough. They're based on some parametric information and some assumptions, but there's not been a lot of work on the ground just to tailor project costs for that particular site. So as a result, the accuracy range for those type of projects that are at the very beginning stages, I mean, they can range anywhere from, in this case, from -50% to plus 100%. And as a result, there's more work to be done, honestly, just in order to start narrowing down the cost estimate, particularly for construction. Where the big dollar amounts are usually for capital projects. So what I've been attempting to do recently is to have get the boards comfortable with the idea of going at least through the approving a pre-design phase of a project, and then stopping the project and letting the board hear what the project team has found. Give an update on what the remaining final design and, more importantly, the construction costs are, because by that point, costs are closer to -20 plus 30 in terms of their accuracy. And as the project continues on, of course, the accuracy gets narrower and narrower because we have a pretty good sense on what that cost is going to be, and until we get to the bid phase and we've selected the construction contractor, then it actually ranges pretty tight. So, contingency for after the planning phase can be 50% of the initial cost, and sometimes even that's not enough. But it's not uncommon to have that type of contingency and after the planning phase. So that's what this table is all about. And the next section of the report, and I think there's just one more page of it, talks about some differences between relative differences between this year's 5-year CIP versus last year's. And so you get some sense of how things have changed over time. As I said, this $1.4 million number is driven primarily through the two topics I referenced earlier. The 5-year CIP is a lot bigger number, just over $23 million. And I look back to see, well, why is that number at that level? I noticed that actually what has happened over the 5-year period, there's actually a decrease of $6.4 million from last year's CIP. So why is that the case? So part of that is just accounting. Part of that is just evolution of the projects. On the accounting side, we're moving some of the costs for the fall safety work from capital to the operating budget. This particular year, we're not spending any sizable amount on that project because honestly, a lot of the work is done this year with the completion of 2 sites near the PIR facility. The last site that I believe needs to be addressed is just next to the Vanport pump station. There's a ditch that has a culvert that allows water to drain into the forebay from runoff from the expo center and some other properties in the vicinity. So there's a decrease there. The PIR pump station replacement is again a counting exercise a little bit. We had some costs there based upon some initial estimates from previous engineers, but what I wanted to make sure is the costs in here reflect what was included in the FEMA grant application and projections from that application moving forward. I wanted to pause just for a moment to give due credit that that FEMA grant was primarily been able to be accomplished because Mr. Allison was able to pull together the costs and actually submitted that application and received the notification for that. Staff has been able to help him provide some data, but James did the bulk of the heavy lifting there. So I really appreciate his time on that. One comment about I referenced the drainage water quality master plan. One of the recommendations out of that plan is to do a drainage improvement within the golf course. As you might recall, the golf course staff were part of the stakeholders as that plan was developed. One of those projects was ranked high enough to be included into the 5-year CIP with the current criterion they're in there. And that's a channel daylighting. So we would be removing a culvert and opening up a channel. Not a significantly large project, but it's an example of how projects get into the CIP and then get ranked. The last item here is the PMLS work. There's actually a decrease amount of money. And that's a reflection of some payment of what was going to be happening this year, and the decrease in construction costs, because we had estimated it's going to be about 6 years or so to get through design construction for the PMLS work. I'll comment briefly about escalation on the last page here. This is a crystal ball exercise, and so as Claudio and others recognize, and so what you do is you attempt to look at what others who track economics and cost variability over time, and give some projection on what they feel like might happen in the coming year and following years. So through a series of indices that we looked at nationwide as well as locally, we noticed that at least the national estimates, there was at least a 5% increase in costs for the coming year. If you start narrowing that down to the West Coast, that number climbs, and we've noticed it's 7% plus or so. So what we're proposing here in the 5-year CIP is for the next year, 23-24, the escalation amount would be 7%, and then you would start dropping it down 1% annually thereafter. So FY25 would be 6%, then 26 would be 5%, and FY27 would be 4%. And so and 4% we feel is closer to a long-term average of increase of cost over time. So that 4% is common and steady from years 4 through 10 in this document. I note that there are 2 exceptions to the escalation, and one is the PMLS project. Their work already included escalation in their costs, so we did not double that up. And of course, the PIR pump station also, I noted earlier that I want to make sure we match the grant application dollars. That's the main body of the report. Appendix A references some more detail, and it talks about, it gives a description of the project number and CIP rank. Talks about the cost accuracy and different classification of the class depending on what phase of or maturity of the project it's in, whether or not the project has external funding, estimates for the current fiscal year, but then annual costs for each of the first 5 years with a total, and then the total for years 6 through 10. As Lori noted, with the approval of the PIR pump station grant, the structural upgrade project likely will go away. And so that amount is $738,000 for the 5-year period, and $54,000 this coming year. So it's likely you won't see that in the next version of this document. So I guess the only thing I'll note that's different is that we do have a project to upgrade the SCADA system. because the hardware that the PIR pump station uses to communicate with our office and honestly our iPhones to monitor the pump station is outdated. And similar to Microsoft Windows or other software you've experienced, sometimes they just know it's the hardware is just no longer even serviced by the vendor, and that's the case not only at PIR but throughout all four special districts. So you all had approved this project last time. We had some staff availability challenges this year, and so we thankfully have an engineer coming on board in June, and this is one of the projects that person will be working on. So I'm expecting that work to be finished up next fiscal year. The last section of the report deals with individual project summaries. Again, these are just one-pagers that explain what the project's about, its purpose, and give you some visual to indicate what it entails. So that's the extent of the report. It's not very long. It's a draft. You'll have another opportunity to take a look at it next month or ask questions beyond those you might have today. As Laura alluded to, there'll be some changes in costs and just to tighten things up. And then after May, the final version will be presented to you all at the June format meeting for your consideration for approval. I'll stop there and field any questions people might have.
Questions? Bill, I have one. I'm not tracking. The PIR pump station structural upgrades, are those had been funded by an IGA with the ES, is that correct?
That is correct.
Just thinking about plus side for the budget, if we can consider repurposing that for a future need.
Yeah, I'm glad you're thinking of that. It turns out it's a net zero change, because that dollar now, that 54,000 that's included in year one was completely funded by the city. So it helps the city, but doesn't help PIR, or sorry, doesn't help Penn 1 in this particular case.
I'm sure you're already thinking about it, but since that money exists, maybe think about how it could be repurposed. That wouldn't be my decision alone, but can't hurt to think about it and ask.
Yeah. So that money originally was identified even through existing task orders through our IGA, and while we had paused the structural upgrade project because we're waiting for the grant new notice, we ended up, the city staff and our staff agreed to repurpose, I think it was about $35,000 to one of the fall protection sites that required some additional funds to finish up. So the existing money that was originally purposed for the structural upgrade was repurposed for that need. There are other needs for PIR. As some of you know, there's only one pump that's currently working at the pump station, and we're in conversation with the city about funding to repair that pump, that failed pump. It's about $110,000. So depending on your perspective, that 54,000 from next year could help pay for that repair. There's more details associated with that conversation, but we're tracking that. You should also know, this board should also know that the Vanport pump station we've stopped pumping at that site, at least from the original structure there, because it was no longer safe to enter that elevated structure. What we've done instead is brought out our diesel portable generator and pumped water instead from that original building, and we're engaged with the Port of Portland staff about a long-term fix there. That's if I remember right, it's close to 130,000 in order to do a replacement, install a replacement pump that'll last 5-7 years or so. So all of that work is not shown in the CIP. Those are repairs to existing structures, so those fall under the M&S section of the budget, and those will be updated as we secure funding. Super long response to your question, James, but hopefully that answers it.
And Mr.
Indeed.
Chair, if I may just acknowledge Supervisor Noodleman, thanks for joining. And as we stated at the beginning, we don't have any board action today. And if you have any questions at all about the material in your packet, about the budget or the CIP, there's plenty of time left until June 20th, I believe, at the format meeting. So we would welcome any questions that you have either now or at any time between now and adoption. And if you just email Lori and me with anything, we welcome that, or we could set up an independent conversation with you if that would be preferable. So just want to make sure you get all the information you need to feel comfortable as a supervisor.
Great.
Or appropriately uncomfortable, as it were.
Yeah. Thank you so much. First, apologies. I love being in the office. One of the hazards, though, is I get yanked in to things that I have no control over. So I do greatly apologize. And to your invitation, I will absolutely take you up. I don't want to take anybody's time up right now, but it's a critical issue, as we all know. And so I will definitely take you up on it. Thanks.
And PJ, I think you heard that. I can't remember quite when you joined, but obviously the same for you and your team at the port.
Great, thank you for that, Jim. I guess we're about 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Are we ready for item D, which is the flood safe Columbia River overview with Aster?
Hi, yeah, I'm ready.
Great, thank you, Aster.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Aster Moulton. I'm the Public Affairs and Community Relations Specialist with the Drainage Districts. And I'm here to introduce a new initiative to you called Flood Safe Columbia River. Any of you who've been listening in on the new district meetings might already know about it. This initiative is meant to raise broad regional awareness about the importance of the flood safety system along the Columbia River, and to describe in a simple and compelling way our need to upgrade this infrastructure to prepare for future flood risks. Next slide. So I'll go over the initiative and some of the background polling and focus group work that we did to land at this initiative. I'll go over what our key messages are and supporting data. And then I'll talk a little bit about how this initiative will support our development of a GEO bond over the next few months or so. Next slide. So we did some public opinion research to help shape this initiative. We did polling last summer. We had a fairly large sample size of 660 people, all voters within urban Multnomah County. And we had an oversample of voters of color intentionally. And we followed up with that with some focus groups this past fall. We had 4 focus groups of registered voters within urban Multnomah County. One group was residents on the east side of the Willamette River, made up of both property owners and renters. One group was residents on the east side of the Willamette, also with property owners and renters. One group of low-income people, and then one group of property owners throughout the entire urban Multnomah County boundary. Next slide. So this is our name and logo and tagline. Flood Safe Columbia River was loosely adapted from Levee Ready Columbia. We replaced Levee Ready with Flood Safe because some people don't know what a levee is, and it's a little more descriptive about the problem that we're trying to solve. And we added the word river to be a little more geographically specific. In the focus groups, we tested different potential logos, and this was the logo that resonated with the most people. People really like that water drop shape. It alludes to heavy rain events and flooding. They liked the Mount Hood in the background, really recognizable icon, and the allusion to the airport and some of the natural areas in the region. And then this tagline, protecting communities and improving the natural environment in a changing climate. Those words were carefully selected to appeal to people's values and motivations, which I will get into throughout the rest of the presentation. Next slide. So Flood Safe Columbia River is meant to be an umbrella initiative that encompasses a lot of the simultaneous and interrelated work of the Army Corps PMLS project, the ongoing work of the drainage districts, the work to stand up the new district, and that ongoing work of Levee Ready Columbia around the FEMA recertification projects. So, you know, I think it can be complicated for someone who's never even heard of this flood protection infrastructure to talk about all the different agencies and interrelated work. And so we really are trying with this initiative to bundle the work together and talk about and brand the work rather than all these different interrelated agencies. Next slide. So one of our key findings from the polling is that there's really low awareness of the flood protection system in Multnomah County, and among the different human-made and natural disasters that could potentially affect the region, flooding is the bottom of what people are concerned about, which I think is a nod to the fact that our system has been working relatively well. There haven't been many major floods in recent memory. That said, you'll notice that we do want to bring awareness to this continued risk. You'll notice that climate change driven extreme weather events were at the top of what people are concerned about. And we know that there's a link between that and flooding. And so we want to, in our initiative, we want to lead with climate change and make that flooding connection for people. A lot of people in the region, when they think about climate change, they immediately jump to wildfires, smoke season, drought, and we want to help bridge that connection that it also means heavier rain events, more snow melt, things like that. Next slide. So our key messages, just a note before I get into them, is that these messages are meant to appeal to your average Multnomah County resident. You'll notice that these messages focus less on the economic activity generated in the managed floodplain than some of the Levee Ready Columbia messages. And that's because those messages were less motivating than some other factors through the research that we did. That's not to say that we wouldn't talk about and highlight that economic activity when talking to certain groups like the business community, which we've already started doing. But yeah, getting into these, we have 3 top line messages. The first one is major floods are increasing with climate change and the Portland region is at risk. So highlighting that climate change. Flooding could be devastating to vulnerable communities, water quality, and the environment. And fortunately, there's a straightforward solution. And we have sub messages for each of these that I'll get into in the following slides. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. So the first message, major floods are increasing with climate change and the Portland region is at risk. It's happened here before and it will happen again. This is in specific reference to Vanport. A lot of people in the region know about that history now due to about a decade of really great educational and awareness work. And when we showed people images of Vanport, those were really compelling, but it feels like a long time ago because a lot of those images are in black and white. So this brings that risk to the present. And then our second message is, the Columbia is one of the world's largest and most powerful rivers. We found in the focus groups that people in the Portland area are really oriented towards the Willamette River. Even when we showed them pictures of the levee along the Columbia, they still wanted to talk about flooding along the Willamette. So this is trying to highlight the fact that there is another really giant river that borders the Portland region, and that's actually where the greatest flood risk is. And we no longer meet federal standards for flood protection. This was appealing for people because people tend to think of federal standards as the bare minimum. Next slide. So flooding could be devastating to vulnerable communities, water quality, and the environment. A system of flood control infrastructure hidden in plain sight protects our region from major disasters. This phrase, hidden in plain sight, resonated with people because, maybe people had biked or walked along Marine Drive, down Marine Drive. Maybe they've visited Broughton Beach and have never noticed the infrastructure before. It can be hard to tell, it can be hard to recognize a levee if you don't know what it looks like. So I think that helped people realize that it's always been there, even if you haven't seen it. Or at least, been there for the past 100 years. And it's nearly 100 years old, requires urgent upgrades. 100 years sounds like a really long time. And the keyword here is upgrades. We tested different action words like repair, modernize, improve, and upgrade. And repair for folks seemed like we're not doing quite enough. Modernized sound a little too expensive. And so when we talk about what we're doing to the infrastructure, we want to say we're upgrading it or improving it. And then another message here is toxins, raw sewage, and other hazardous materials could pollute rivers, streams, and drinking water. People were really motivated by the environmental impacts of a flood event, so we want to highlight those here. And then 8,000 residents, 60,000 workers, and 75% of the region's businesses would feel the impacts. So we're highlighting the fact that there are residential communities along the Columbia River. A lot of people don't know that. And also to the fact that there would be some economic disruption that would affect the entire region. Next slide. So fortunately, there's a straightforward solution. This was really helpful for us and kind of an aha moment for us in the focus groups. When we first showed people the estimated cost for all of these improvements, people were like, that seems way too low. And they're like, why is that so low? I think when people hear infrastructure upgrades, they expect something really expensive, like another Columbia River crossing that has a million alternatives and requires decades of planning. But when we told people that these solutions are relatively straightforward, and there aren't too many alternatives associated with them, in a lot of cases it's just raising or strengthening a levee or upgrading equipment, that really resonated with people and was convincing. Yeah, so we want to highlight what we're doing, raising vulnerable sections of flood protection walls along the Columbia and upgrading aging equipment. And simple, cost-effective engineering solutions will protect lives, homes, environmental recovery, and save millions of dollars in disaster recovery, environmental quality. This idea of preventative nature was really convincing for people. And nature-based solutions can reduce the risk of major floods. People really liked the nod to nature-based solutions, even if they didn't quite understand what that means. And the fact that there's a potential match from the federal government was also really motivating. Next slide. So this is the initiative that will bring out to the community to raise general awareness and also engage people on developing and refining our GeoBond. We're currently working with our new district board on the bond scenarios, and we're hoping to bring those out to the public for engagement this summer to understand relative levels of support for each scenario. And then we'll bring those back to the new district board for a referral for 2024. And then quick note is that once the bond measure is referred, there's certain limitations that government staff and representatives have when talking about the initiative. We won't be able to campaign and say vote yes or no for this, but we will be able to provide factual educational information that's approved by the Secretary of State. And we'll have training for all of our board members when we get to that point. Next slide. So the good news is that from our initial polling, there's total support of 66%. And I've heard from our political consultants that, you know, you want to be at least 60%. So I think this is good news. Next slide. And what's even better is that after we deliver some of our messaging, total support increases from 66% to 72%. And you'll see that strongly support, that strong base increases from 23% to 40%. So we're in a pretty good position right now. And then next slide. Some final thoughts on message discipline. The message is better coming from trusted messengers. We tested different videos of people describing the issue, and people found it really compelling when they came from folks like Ed Washington or an environmental advocate. We showed them a video of Bob Salinger talking. And they also find flood safety engineers really reliable sources as well. But people are a little more skeptical of typical government staff and elected officials. And we also want to avoid conflicting narratives. We want to stick to these tested messages as much as we can, and really avoid talking, you know, about the difference between Pen 1 and Pen 2, and yeah, and the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District is just, every time I say that to anyone in the public, their eyes glaze over and they stop paying attention. Yeah, so we want to lead with flood safe Columbia River and these messages. And then finally, shape the narrative, don't let it shape you. We want to be really strong in these messages as we start bringing them out to the public, rather than letting other sources, smaller public opinion groups or the media kind of shape the public narrative. That would then, you know, we have to kind of respond and mitigate those conflicting messages. So I think the more grounded we can be in these messages, the better. And that's all I had for you. If you haven't visited our website already, I recommend checking it out, floodsafecolumbiariver.org. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I can't resist offering commentary about, I was certain that the consolidation of agencies would be a cogent message for people, but the whole bucket of government in general is just so negatively viewed that it was just like, yeah, don't, you know, it sounds even worse. Why do you have them in the first place? So there may be some places where it works, but it doesn't work with the typical voter. So yeah,
we talked about that a little bit in the focus groups, and people were like, more efficient government. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Nice job, Esther. Questions or comments from the board?
We're in a really good position polling wise. We can still break this if we try hard, but it feels reasonably good to me. I guess another anecdote would be one of our consultants was at the Portland Business Alliance recently, and they have staked out I think a rather strong position about new taxes. And when we described this need to them, and Esther, you could probably be more accurate, but it was, yeah, okay, like some of the stuff we actually need to do, and they felt pretty good about it. Now, again, we could inspire them to oppose this if we work at it, but I think there's a general acceptance that these kinds of investments are pretty important to the community. And if we keep it basic and clear, I think we've got a pathway to success.
Yeah, this really looks great, and really appreciate how you're getting ahead of the you know, what eventually is a campaign by really setting up a really strong foundation for that, and building that education in a you know, in a broader sense, and kind of like really just kind of creating that firm foundation. So more specific and precise messages around what we need will resonate more. So it's all the right work, and doing it in a timely fashion. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Claudio. I echo Claudio's comments, and I was glad to see in the timeline, or not in the timeline, but when you were talking about the timeline, future board training, understanding roles, responsibilities. I'm sure there'll be a if contacted by the media sort of thing. So yeah, I look forward to seeing.
And we do intend to seek a safe harbor ruling from the Secretary of State on all of our web and print and talking point materials, so that we really know where the boundaries are. It's really important to just be
Yeah,
clean on that.
and we will have a strategy, an earned media strategy that we will train certain people on, people who we think will be good messengers. So that's all part of it. And then I'll just quickly note some of our next steps. We're starting some educational work already. We had a short webinar last night, and we'll be doing some outreach at the Vanport Mosaic Festival coming up. And we were also forming a work group made of new district board members and people from the community that will help broaden our network and give us more capacity for education and outreach.
Great. Well, thank you. And again, we look forward to hearing more. We're ready to move on to our final agenda item with Colin and the PMLS update.
Thank you, Colin Rowan, Director of Planning Public Affairs for MCDD. And I'm just going to give a real quick 2 or 3 minute overview with a little bit of reminder of where we're coming from and where we're going. And then Armand has all of the details on next steps and board actions. So just as that quick reminder of where we are in the Portland Metro Levy System study with the Army Corps of Engineers is that we have successfully completed the feasibility phase. In December, we had 2 huge milestones. One, which was an act of Congress designating the PMLS project for construction in the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. That is a huge milestone and directs the Army Corps of Engineers, federal government, to keep moving forward with the project. And we also were included in the appropriations bill that gave us the funding for the first year of the design phase. The upcoming phase, the design phase, is called the pre-construction engineering design phase. So we call that PED. So you're going to hear that a bunch in the next 3.5 years, which is the other update. It's a 3.5 year phase. The Army Corps of Engineers has already, at the Portland District, has already received an initial tranche of funding to get going on a design agreement with us. They have started to put together their technical team there, and we're staying coordinated with Mark Wilcox as the project manager for the PMLS project on MCDD side. So he's not here today. Just want to give a shout out to him that he's doing a great job moving a lot of different pieces forward on this. So the only other pieces is what's coming up. So Armand will touch or go through what the board decisions are. There are a few other things that are moving forward and in the background. We do need to do appropriations every year. And so we have moved forward with filling out congressionally designated spending requests, CDS requests, also known as earmarks. And I want to give thanks to the port, to Metro, and the city of Portland, all who furnished letters supporting that. But even better news is that we were able to move from having to make that earmark request into making programmatic requests because the PMLS project was included in the president's budget. So this is another great signal. Even if we weren't, we would still be in a good place moving forward, but it really puts us in a really strong position that we're not making an earmark or a special request, we're making a programmatic request. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to be in the basically get the next tranche of funding for federal fiscal year 24 coming up. The only other piece, which is a longer need, is that we are going to need a New Start designation. Anyone that has done major capital projects with the federal government, DOT, transit sort of projects, we do need that designation. We need it before we go into the construction phase, which is tentatively spring of 2026. We have a federal advocate at Carpi Clay, Julie Minerva, who is great in making all the right connections. And so we are confident that we'll be able to get in front of all the right people so that we get that New Start designation, hopefully ahead of schedule, not just in time. With that, I want to hand it over to Armand, and then can take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Colin. Good morning, Penn One board. Am I coming through okay? Great, okay. Armand Resto-Spots, MCDD Associate District Counsel. I want to walk through briefly here at the end of our meeting and to highlight for you the anticipated action items that'll be coming up for this design phase. There are a number of steps that each board will be taking concurrently to get to kicking off this design phase work. In your packet, I've included a memo that walks through those anticipated action steps. My discussion here with you, I'm really just going to walk through those. So if you want to spend some more time thinking through, and if you have any more questions, know that it's all in there. It is a lot of information, but we thought it'd be very helpful to just kind of give you this overview and heads up, because these next couple months, we anticipate presenting much of this back to the Penn One, along with the other legacy district boards to get this underway. So as you just heard, the design phase for the PMLS project, it'll be officially underway when we execute a design agreement, a contract with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This is the master overarching contract that'll outline the terms, conditions, obligations of the Corps and non-federal sponsor with respect to design phase work. So the scope of work, and then most importantly, identifying the share of costs. If you recall, as local sponsors, we are responsible for a 35% match against the government's 65%. I've included the current working draft of that design agreement as an attachment to my memo. It is based on a model design that the Corps uses nationwide. Those terms in that agreement are very unlikely to change. The things that might change are the final estimated numbers, but even in that case, we don't anticipate much movement at this stage. So I would recommend heading into these next 2 months thinking about maybe spending some time getting comfortable with that agreement, because I'll get to it of one of the steps our boards will be taking is authorizing our JCA to be signing that contract. So in that memo, I've worked through things chronologically, what makes sense in my head about how we would have, how we would lead up to that design agreement. But in reality, a lot of these actions will be taking place concurrently at the same time in the same meetings. So one way of looking at this is there's a funding component and then a legal component. So let's start with the funding piece. If this board recalls, back in February of 2022, this board, along with every other legacy district board, passed a resolution agreeing to share equally in financing the design phase. And that was contingent on two things. One, that the districts would be awarded certain levy grant funds from the state of Oregon through Business Oregon. And then number two, that the districts would enter into a cost share intergovernmental agreement that would essentially outline how that money will be shared and then move to the Corps. So the first piece, the Business Oregon contracts. I believe a couple months ago, Colin had briefed you that we had been awarded levy grant funds. We went back to them for a minor revision related to our proposed dissolution process in the future to provide for that in the contract. And Actually, just yesterday, I just received word of those amended agreements, those amended contracts, and those have been approved. And so we anticipate getting those back any day now. And our plan will be to have those before the board in May. I believe in, Wendy might be able to confirm for me. I forget if it was 2 months ago that we presented those contracts, but they're in a prior packet of yours. And those contracts will be largely the same, but we'll highlight the minor change next month. So with that funding secured, the next piece would be that cost sharing IGA. And this is going to outline the cost allocation between the districts, how those shares are broken down equally. It'll outline how that money is moving from every district into essentially one pot, the JCA, and then how the JCA would then eventually make payments to the Corps pursuant to that design agreement. The cost allocation schedule of how and what the funds look like for each district. The best estimates at today's date that we have is in your isn't an attachment to my memo in your packet as well. We are hoping to have that IGA presented to the boards possibly in May, possibly in June, but definitely here in the next coming months. And we can talk about the specifics of that too when we have that in front of you. So with those, that would be the funding piece. With those two steps, funding is secured and we have the mechanism for how the districts are sharing equally and how that money will move to the Corps for design work. The next two pieces are just sort of legal in nature. So if you, as with prior PMLS work, the feasibility study going back to 2018, real estate planning assistance work in 2020, we've employed the Joint Contracting Authority to serve as non-federal sponsor to represent the drainage districts collectively. Again, with the PMLS being a system-wide project, the Corps seeing this as a system, not by boundaries, and those collective benefits to the entire system, we're going to be again recommending that the JCA act as the non-federal sponsor for the design phase. And in reality, what that really means is that they're going to be the entity signing the design agreement. And so to get there, we'll first need to have every district board assign the respective authority to the JCA to sign on their behalf. And so what that would look like are resolutions that we'll propose to every district that will attach the design agreement as to form, and essentially have the boards be able to review that design agreement and answer questions, clarify terms, and if acceptable, that the respective district boards would then authorize the JCA to sign that agreement on their behalf as non-federal sponsor. With every board doing that, the JCA would have the respective authority to execute that agreement. And the final step would be the JCA then taking action under resolution to accept those assignments from every district and then approve the design agreement, which would look like authorizing the executive director to sign on their behalf. With that, the design agreement is executed and we are formally underway and the work begins finally. I'm happy to answer any questions about that process. But again, don't hesitate if you want to think about more questions, you can send those over our way. All of this is in your packet under my memo. And I'll pause there for questions or if Colin wanted to hit anything that I had missed there. Thanks.
Nothing additional for me. Thank you, Armand.
Questions from the board, comments?
A lot of work to get money from the state and the feds, it turns out.
Yeah.
It's true, but I gotta say, as Lori was walking through through things, I was like, leverage upon leverage, right? We got it didn't take a lot of money to move a lot more money. So
yeah, no,
really appreciate that. So
yeah, and just kudos to the team for getting the business organ grants and so on. It really saved us from, I think, a very challenging cost allocation conversation among the different boards. It's been very instrumental in our ability to move forward.
Thank you, Armand. Thank you for the detail in the packet. Do you, I may have missed this, do you know when we'll bring this in front of the board to authorize the JCA, the agreement with the JCA.
Yeah, you know, I know, actually I know Colin and I will be meeting here very shortly to start talking about that process. I think our anticipation is the board should be looking at May, and then if not May, June. I think anything later than June isn't realistic at this stage. We were probably anticipating these next 2 months, all of this will be proposing to the boards.
Great, thank you. Okay, with that, are we ready to adjourn early? Did that happen? Fantastic. Well, thank you to the staff for all the presentations. Thank you for presenting a lot of information in advance, clearly getting us to the agenda. Look forward to closing out this fiscal year and moving into the next one. And thank the board for being here, all of you. Appreciate everyone making time today when I know you have other things going on. I hope that sometime in the next hour or two, you have a moment to get outside. I'll share some personal information. My family decided we didn't have too much going on, so we got a puppy that everyone else was going to take care of. So I'll be out taking a walk in just a few minutes. But whatever your pleasure is, I hope you enjoy it and enjoy the sunny afternoon.
We expect pictures, James.
Yes, I was gonna say.
Will do.
What variety of puppy did you get?
Well, it was a research to make a long story long, it was a research project. We had to wait for our 16-year-old cat to pass